Hi, welcome to the fifth episode of Distributed.core. It's Peter and
Derek.
And today we'll talk about reads and queries because recently we were able to create a new discount. So we know how to create a data, but now we'll see how we can actually retrieve the data from our service and later on from our API gateway, right?
Yes, that's correct. So I think that we should start with some simplified diagram that hopefully will help you to get the idea of how we actually fetch the data from the particular microservices. And of course, I think that in this episode we actually will cover the whole flow. As you will see in the next episode, this in some cases this might be more complicated, but we'll get to this in the next episode. So let's start with the whole flow. Of course, everything is kicked off by the HTTP request that comes from some client application. It might be some Postman or some REST client or Angular application, whatever. So basically, we create a HTTP request which contains the query itself. And first thing we should distinguish is that since we want to read, so we'll create the GET request. This GET request will not contain any body because it's not allowed, according to the specifications. So we will use the query parameters or the path itself to pass some data, which we'll later use for filtering or maybe for querying the particular data we want to query. So let's say we could do something like API/discount/1. So 1 in this case might be an ID. So this is the data that we will use later for the query. So we have this HTTP request, which is of course called by some action in the API gateway. In our case, this will be some MVC action because we're for now we're using the simple ASP.NET Core app, and of course then after we get this request, we need to query the particular microservice. So I will not cover this right now, but we will see later how we actually know which service want to fetch. But somehow we know that we want to query, let's say, service with the discounts. So we simply forward this HTTP request to this particular microservice. And this for this case we are using the library called RestEase, and this is nothing more but I would say the simple wrapper for HTTP client, which is part of the .NET Core. So basically, this wraps the HTTP client and it exposes the strongly typed API for your code. So it's less code for you to write. It's very simple. So that's why we decided to use it. So after we query the particular microservice, it's caught by another API, but this time, as you see, it's internal API of the particular microservice, and it's internal because it is not exposed to the end user. So we are not allowed to query directly, to call directly this API from the end user, so from the client application. We will cover this also, how we can actually make this internal or not exposed to the public web. After we get this in the internal API, we kind of do similar thing that we did in with the commands. So when we started playing with commands, we started with the synchronous way of dealing with them. So we kind of use dispatcher for dispatching the command to the particular command handler, and we'll kind of do the same thing. So we'll dispatch the query to the particular query handler. So basically class that is the part of our infrastructure, and with simply in this class we will actually create a query for the repository, which will then forward this to the MongoDB. And just to remind you, because we are following the CQRS, since this is the read part, we will not mutate any state. So query handler will actually return some data. So this will be, in this case, a generic task, because we are doing this asynchronously and we expect some result. But because we follow CQRS, we will not be allowed to mutate the state. And of course, after we fetch the data and return the result from the query handler, we will simply do the response, HTTP response to the API gateway, and then back to the client application. So this flow is synchronous, will not involve any kind of QE for this, and we kind of explained this in the previous episodes, why we actually distinguish these two types of the calls to our application. So that was a brief introduction to what we are going to do today.
Yeah, good explanation. And at first we'll start with this part. So we'll be only calling the internal API, and once it works, we'll add the API gateway.
Yes.
So you'll see how we can actually call the internal API via our API gateway and simply redirect or forward further the request and response. Okay.
Yeah, I think that for now this internal API will be actually available for us.
Yes, of course.
And this will stay available for a while. I think that we need to get to the deployment part to actually make it internal. So for those of you, just keep calm and we'll definitely hide this one way or another.
Okay, so let's get into the code. And before we start, let's actually create a customer and create a discount. So let's jump into our DShop REST file, and we need to start, of course, our services. So in order to create a customer and then create a discount, we need to start the API. So I will start my API. We need to start the identity service. We need to start the customer service. And finally, our discount service. Not this one, discounts. Okay. After a while, these 4 services should be up and running. Customers and discounts. And now we can follow our very basic flow, which means that first we'll create a new customer. So at first, let me sign up as this user. Okay, I think it executed. And let's log in. I'll grab my access token. And let's paste it here. And let's make a post request to our customer's endpoint. Okay, and let me check if we have the database. Okay, so we have a discounts database, customers collection, and now we can create a new discount. So I can grab my customer ID, for example, from here or directly from my database, and let's just create a new discount. Maybe like this. Okay, and maybe let's create another one, 25%. Let's see if it's there. Okay, so our data is here. Now the question is how we can get the data from our service at first. So that should be pretty straightforward. Here we have our discounts controller. And remember that this post method, we are no longer using it because we sent our comments to the message bus, and via our handlers we subscribe to these comments, so this one is no longer in use. but instead we'll create an HTTP GET method in order to fetch data. So let's try to create a new GET method for our discounts, right? So we want to retrieve these discounts from our database. Okay, so of course it will be async. So I can type something like async task of action result maybe. For now, let's call it a GET method, and let's mark it with an HTTP GET attribute. And this is it for now, okay? So now, before we go further with this implementation, we need to think what we want to retrieve, because we don't want to, or we probably never should, return our domain, because our domain should never be exposed to the outside world, okay? Yes. Especially to the end user. I'm not even talking about layers, I'm talking about end user, so we should never do it. And instead, we need to incorporate it.
I would also say that in most cases, we actually don't need this. I think that people all tend to use the same models for both for writing to the application and for reading. And in most cases, you actually don't need that much data. Especially when you see it's pretty common when you let's think about drop-down list or something like this. So for this particular component on the UI, you actually need just some label that you will display in the drop-down and some ID that will actually identify this. And people tend to use their large write models with a lot of unnecessary data just to display this drop-down. So we actually want to, as I said, follow the CQRS, and we'll use completely different data for reading and for writing.
Yeah,
this is not the same.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you can do well with having a single model and having a single entity, which will be both your read and data model, which is quite common if you are working on some typical CRUD app. But if you want to do things in a little bit maybe better or different way, we'll do it simply by adding the so-called DTOs. So I will create here a new directory, DTO, which stands for Data Transfer Object. And DTO is just an enemic structure, is a flat structure that we can understand as something that we pass between our layers. So for example, if we were to create here another projects, let's say there will be our API, then we'll have our core with our domain, we'll have infrastructure and services. So our API, which is a presentation layer, would retrieve the DTOs from our application services layer, meaning from our handlers, right? So you can use DTOs to pass the data between your actual layers, and you can also use it to return to your end user. DTO or view models if you are working with typical MVC app where you render the Razor views. All right, so I will create a new class, and let me just rename it to discount DTO. And within our discount DTO, I want to return a few properties. So I can grab this, and maybe instead of this used at, I can put something here like public bool used or is used. Yeah, so this will mean whether we use our discount code or not. Right, without information, without providing information at what date it happened, or
one thing,
available. Oh, like this, maybe.
Available is good. And one more thing, as you see in a DTO, we're not afraid of the public setters because this is just for the querying data. This makes no sense to make them idempotent in this case.
This is a structure that you pass between your layers. It has no logic. It has no state. You could even do it like this without anything. These are just properties or fields that you just pass between different layers. So there is no methods, no state, nothing like this. Okay, so this is what we want to return from our API. All right. So now let's create a new query. So we want to have pretty much the same behavior as we have for our handlers for events and comments. So I will create a new directory. Let's call it queries. And let's create a new class, and I will call it maybe browse discounts or get discounts, whatever it is. And I will make this class, I will make it implement the iQuery interface. And if you take a look, it lives within our common. Who could guess it? So here is our iQuery. And for our iQuery, we also have the iQuery handler. So it's pretty similar to the command and event handler, with the only difference that it actually returns the data, right? So our commands event handlers are, they do not return the data, right? So, and our query handlers return the data, because otherwise they wouldn't make much sense. So our iQuery will return. And here we could do a few things. So I could, for example, say something like enumerable of discount DTO. Or
okay, so the generic parameter in this case is the result that will actually this query will return.
Is the result, yeah. What this query will return. And I can leave it like this, but I can also add here parameters. So let's say that we want to provide, it can be either required or an optional parameter, customer ID. So with customer ID, it can be nullable, so we can check whether it has a value at all, like this, or we can check if the customer ID is not GUID empty, whatever makes sense to you. And we can put there as many parameters if we want. This will be bound directly from our query string, which is part of our URL. So let's make a class like this. And now let's get back into our project. And within handlers, I will create here under the discount subdirectory a new class, and let's just call it browse discounts handler. And as you might guess, here we'll use the iQuery handler type. And this type actually expects you to provide two generic parameters. So the first one is our query type, and the second one is result. So here I will say that I will be using the browse discounts, which is iQuery, and this browse discounts returns our iQuery, or sorry, the enumerable of discount DTO, like this. And now I can simply implement the members. This is here. Let's make it async. And now I can retrieve the data from our database, from cache, or whatever data storage we are going to use, and map it into our DTOs, and then just return it as the result of this handler. Okay, so let's make it here a constructor. And one important thing that I want to talk about, because we can actually use our repository here for the simplicity. But I want you to be aware of one thing. Let's just make it discounts repository, like this. Okay, and what I want you to actually think about or be aware of is that usually the repository is more about your abstraction over the domain. So things like update your aggregate, create, delete, retrieve. But things like, for example, we have here, like let's say filtering the data, which are really view specific, or the color of the API specific, right? This is some data which the end user wants to retrieve. So usually it's not really the concern of our domain, because this is concern of our view or our API as the result of the HTTP call to our API endpoint, right? So here we'll use our Mongo repository, but in most cases, you could inject here directly, like iDatabase, for example, or you could start here maybe a new connection, so something like var SQL equals new SQL connection, and just execute a raw query. Because it might turn out that your read models live in a separate database, or you store them in the Redis cache, or you have prepared some views in your SQL server that actually returns much more data than your domain object, right? So just be aware that whenever you think about querying the data, you don't really have to use repositories, and you probably shouldn't use them if you have different or distinct read models, which are not the same as your write models. But for the simplicity, we'll use the repository here, but keep in mind that you don't really need to use it at all, okay? Especially if you split your data, if you move your data to read models to different tables or different databases. All right, so let's get our discount. So I can do something like repository, and here we have our browse async, and our browse async can accept something. So again, I can either use directly my iMongo repository like this, or I could use my iDiscount repository coming from my domain, right? But like I said, we probably don't want to really use it, so we'll just stick to plain iMongo repository. But we could go even lower and execute raw Mongo queries if you want to be really performant. All right, so let's try to call our browse async, and here we can provide our predicate. So I will say, well, what can I say? I could filter it by my customer ID. So let's assume that our customer ID property, which is part of our browse discounts, will be required. So we always have to provide a customer ID in order to get the discounts. So the customer ID has to be equal to the customer ID. I'm sorry, the query customer ID.
Yeah.
And here we have another parameter called query. Okay, and the reason we are doing this is because if you take a look here, we implemented our own page result. So if you want to have the pagination in place, you can use this browse async, which will return the page result. And based on the page and the results per page that you provide within your query, it will, just go into the database and take and skip the amount of properties that you ask it to do. So if you want to do pagination, you can use browse async, but then you would have to change your query, which is here, to be of type iPagetQuery, like this. But maybe for now, let's just do the simpler version called find async.
Yeah, the find async.
Yeah, let's do it like this, and maybe later on we'll do this. Do another one.
Skip the query parameter. Yeah.
So
maybe shouldn't we change the name of the query to be more consistent, because now it's find async where the query is browse.
You mean like find discounts, or?
Yeah. Maybe it's just to follow the convention.
Okay, we can do it. Let's do it. So yeah, that's right. So find discounts, and we'll execute this find async on our discounts repository.
Also the handler. Find
discounts. Correct. Find discounts.
Yeah. I don't know whether there is some conventions for the naming of this type, but you can came up with your own. So whether you have the pagination or the single item or collection or
exactly. So let's try to map our discounts now. So again, we could use here things like AutoMapper or some other libraries, but sometimes you may just skip all these libraries and just do the simple mapping using the select link queue operator. So let's just do it like this. Return discounts, and here I can do select. And I can say select new discount DTO. And I can just assign my data directly like this. So my ID, my customer ID, which is customer ID. Now the code, percentage, and finally available, which will mean D used at and doesn't have a value. It's false, right? So we are mapping our domain into these DTOs.
And of course, if you want to reuse this in later, later for some other queries. You can extract this simply to some extension methods to not duplicate the code. But for now, it's fine for us.
You can do extensions, automapper. You can provide your own mapping interfaces, whatever makes sense to you. And if you want to make it, you could actually do it one-liner. You could remove the async await, and you could do something like a dot continue with and provide a mapping here. And you can do it a one-liner without async await. But maybe for the for the clarity of this example, we'll stick to this a little bit more like extended version. Okay. So now let's try to return the data from our controller. So here's our query, and here's our handler for this query. And let's jump into our discount controller. And within our controller, I can say that my iAction result will return the IEnumerable of discount DTO. And the reason I'm doing this is because later on, if I would like to make use of Swagger, providing these generic types will actually allow the Swagger to generate this documentation for us, and it will be able to resolve the types, the data that we return from our API. And we'll pass to our get method our define discounts query like this. And I will need to mark it with an attribute called from query, which will properly bind the incoming query string and all of the parameters of the query string. It will bind them to the properties to this class. Okay. And finally, I could call my dispatcher, and here's my query async. So my query async expects this query parameter, and it will return.
And it does exactly the same thing internally. So this simply uses some service locator to actually find the proper query handler that actually expects the find discounts query and returns IEnumerable of the discount DTO, and simply calls after it's this handler gets resolved. It's simply calls the handle async on that object.
Yeah, so if you were to take a look here, it's a little bit of the reflection magic, but basically what it does, it just looks for this query handler, creates a dynamic type, and passes our query as dynamic here. And this is why we don't have to specify here the two generic parameters. Yeah, we can just pass the query and it will magically work. All right, so here is our query async, and let's kill the discount service, and maybe we can start it with in a debugger and see if it works at all. So let's run our discount service and the debug for the discounts, which is here. And let's get into our handler. I'll put it there. So right now, I can open maybe I'll make it from REST client. It will be a little bit more readable. So I can do a GET request, and I can call my API URL yet because my API gateway is not aware of this query. So I will have to call my service directly. So let's make localhost 5010 discounts, and here we'll provide our customer ID. And let's put the £3 here, and let's see if it works. So let me try to send this request.
But for now, you did not provide any customer ID.
Yeah, sorry. But let's see if it actually works though.
Okay.
All right, so I clicked on this discounts. Okay, so here it is. We got into our find discounts. It will ask the database to get the discounts, but because the query customer ID is empty, there is no discounts, right? So let's try to copy our customer ID and provide it via query string. So I can say customer ID equals our ID. send a request once again. And as you can see now, if I look into my query, there is the customer ID properly assigned, F5.
Yeah, this is the standard model binding provided by the ASP.NET
Yeah,
Core.
and here
this is not our
here is
magic.
discounts, two items, F5, and there is my data. So our query works, right? It was pretty straightforward, and as you can see, we have this single responsibility principle applied also to query. So it's for comments, events, and queries, right? So that's pretty nice.
Yeah, and just to remind you, because as I said, in the query handler, we're not mutating any state. We're not writing to the database. This query is idempotent, means that actually we can call this endpoint as many times as we want, and we'll always get the same data. Nothing will be changed in the state of our domain. So that's kind of important thing, and the advantage of using the CQRS, following the CQRS actually.
Yeah. Okay.
No side effects.
Sorry. What now? Maybe we could create another get endpoint and make our return a single discount with a little bit more details. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So what we want to do now is let's create a new DTO. So here is our discount DTO, and let's make a new class, and I will call it the discount details DTO.
It's an interface. No.
Oh my god. Class. Okay. So we can either derive from our discount DTO, or we can use composition. So maybe let's favor composition over inheritance. So I can put there my discount DTO. Let's call it discount. And here I can create a new DTO, and let's just call it customer DTO. So when we are asking for the list, we'll grab the list of the discounts, which is a flat structure. And when we'll ask for this particular details, of the discount, we'll get a little bit richer model containing more properties, being discount and some customer data. So for my customer, I want to have the customer ID like this. And maybe I will also like to have an email for whatever reason. So let's just put there an email, or a first name, last name, or address, whatever I need. Okay, so let's do it like this. Now the question is, before we get a question, let's just add it here, the property. So customer get set, and let's move it here. So this is our new details DTO. Now the question is, where do I get from my customer's email, right? Because in my domain, my customer doesn't have an email. So just put there an email like this, private set, and let's add it to the constructor. But now there's a problem, like where do I get my email from? But if you remember correctly from the previous episode, within our customer created, we actually have more data because we decided to use only this ID. We actually skipped the rest of the data, so we didn't even put it into this event. But if you take a look at the original event coming from the customer service, so it contains quite a lot of data, a few more properties. So let's just grab this email and put it into our customer created event like this. And let's now get back into our customer created handler within our discount service, and let's pass the email here. Okay, so we've just upgraded or extended our customer domain model with this email property, and we can do it because this email is part of the event. So now our event that we are subscribing to, instead of having 6 properties, which are all of them, or instead of having 1 as we had at the beginning, we added this email. So right now we have ID and the email. So this is the change. And now we are able to actually create our customer DTO because we have both the ID and the email.
And just to remind you, if you have this, if you'll get to the situation when your events grown too much because you have a lot of data that you would like to fetch, then maybe it's a better idea to actually provide an ID and fetch this synchronously using the API from the command handler.
Yeah, I think in the next episode we'll also show how to deal with this. How to deal with this with these bigger objects when you can't really put everything into event because it wouldn't make sense or it would get too big and so on.
You actually can, but
you can, but
it will make no sense in terms of performance.
You might get some really big performance hits by doing so. All right, so let's create a new query. Okay, so we don't want to have single parameters or value types. We want to have query being a class for each query, right? So no GUID ID as part of our discount controller. A new get method, we want to have a separate query class. So let's create a new class and let's name it get discount. And again, it will be IQuery returning the discount details DTO in that case. And our get discount will have a single property. And let's just call this one the customer ID.
Not the ID?
Sorry. Yeah, we are asking
the ID of
we are asking by the discount ID. Yeah,
yep.
You got me. Okay, I was checking if you're listening to me. Okay, so let's get into into the handlers directory and let's create a new handler. And once again, we'll create a new handler and it will be again a query handler, and let's call it get discount handler. So let's make it implement our iQuery handler interface. And the first type is the get discount as the query type, and the second one is the discount details DTO. Implement the missing members. And right now, simply, we can either inject our repositories, or once again, we can inject we can inject our domain repositories, or we can inject our plain Mongo repositories. So maybe let's stick to this convention where we don't really use our domain repositories and then just use the plain database, if I can say so. So here we want to have the discount repository. So discount repository. And I will also want to have the customer repository. So customers repository. Let's see. Customers. Okay. And now I can do the following thing. So I can ask my discounts repository. So let's make it await discounts repository. I need to put there async. Get async by query ID. Query ID. So now if my discount doesn't exist, I could simply, so if discount is null, I can simply return a null. And again, you can do different things here. You could throw an exception, you could return maybe a null object,
null,
or you could
maybe,
or you could return like you said, follow some options or maybe pattern, which is quite cool, but it's not really the default pattern built into the C#, at least for now. So we'll just simply return the ugly null here. And now if our discount exists, and we are certain that it exists, we can get our customer. So I will call my customers repository, and let's make get async, and I will pass here the discount customer ID. Now we don't have to check whether customer is null, because it should never be null. Right? Because you are not able to create your discount if your customer doesn't exist. However, if your customer would be null here, that means you have some corrupted data and you need to do something about it, right? So if your customer would be null here, there is some problem, there is some corrupted data, and you have to deal with it on your own. But we can assume that it will be never null because our discount cannot be created without customer existing at first. So we have our customer, and now we can return a new DTO. So let's return new discounted DTO. And again, as you can see, we'll be initializing the same object as we did here. So probably either some extension method or some IMapper interface or automapper would be helpful here, but we'll just do the great copy and paste pattern. So let's make it like this. Sorry, it should be discount.
You missed the
new discount. And I will do this trick. Let's do a quick rename to D and then discount once again. Okay.
That was awesome.
Yeah. So here's our discounts, and we also want to have our customer DTO. So let's just put their customer DTO and fill it with our customer data. So here is our ID, and here is our email. So customer email. Okay. So that's pretty much it. Now we can use our get discount handler. So once again, let's create a new endpoint within our controller. So let me just do a copy paste because it'll be faster. So I will just copy paste this one, and maybe let's make this one below. So instead of returning IAM variable, we'll return here the discount DTO, and here we'll
discount details.
Discount
DTO.
details, right?
Yeah.
And here, instead of from query, we'll do from root, because we'll be binding
from path. Actually,
from root will be also good. It will also do, yeah.
Yeah.
From will be fine. And here I can will provide the get discount type query, and within our root, if you take a look here, we need the ID, right?
Yeah. So the name must match the model binding will only work if this.
And this is done by default by the framework. So it's been there in MVC for years now. And if you want to go further, you can do, for example, something like ID : GUID. So if it's not GUID, it will not even get into this path. And you can all do all these sort of things like required or optional, and so on and so on, and build your paths here. For example, my or details, but the details wouldn't make sense here because we are following REST. So we know that this is details because we are asking for data by its unique ID. Okay, so this has been there for years, the routing. And let's try to restart our API. So maybe let's put the breakpoint here once again. And I think I can actually omit this one. Or, okay, I can't. All right. So let's.
Why you can't? You can't?
Yeah, I can. I think it's mostly because of this.
Binding, because you have the action result. Okay, yeah.
So, okay, let's.
There is implicit.
Yeah, there's this implicit binding. So, all right. So let's start our service once again, and let's put a breakpoint within our get discount handler here. So let's put it here. Let's put it here, and also here. And before we do it, we need to do one thing. So we need to create a new customer, or we need to change our customer and add to him, the email property. So I could do something like edit document and put the email property here, or I can create a new customer and it will have the email field assigned properly due to our upgraded event.
Yeah, that's the one thing that you should also be aware that, if you will decide to use this technique of this method of the synchronization, so using the events for getting some data from the other microservices, there might be a chance that your contract will actually change, and you need to kind of live with it. one way or another.
Yeah.
So of course, if you're on the development like we are, we can simply throw it away or modify the data or whatever. But on the production, you kind of need to support the version 1 which had just an ID, and the version 2 which also contained an email.
Yeah, so you can do API versioning, or you can do things like GraphQL or OData or some other things, but you need to be aware of it. And because we are using the NoSQL database here, and there is no things like schema, so at least we didn't find any schema, so we can put here anything we want, right? And it will just work. So we have to be aware of that. So right now I'll create a new customer by signing up. So let's do a sign up. And let's sign in as this new customer, this user for now. All right, there is also E, and let's paste it here like this. And let's create a new customer account. So I'll do a post once again. I'll use the same data, I don't really care about it. So let's see, customers, and we have new customer with the email property. So the previous one doesn't have an email, this one has an email. And right now, let's try to create a new discount dedicated to this customer. So here is my customer ID. And
I think that in this particular case, the query will actually work for both.
Yeah, it will. But
this will simply return the null in the email. So of course we cannot come up with something.
It will work just fine, right? Because there is an email. So okay. Oh, there was some old endpoint.
But in more advanced scenarios, you might need some additional null checks or something.
Yeah,
or
but
some default data.
But because this is JSON is flexible, we don't have to really care about these things. You just have to be aware of that it's happening here. But how you deal with this, it's on your own. All right, so I have a new discount for my new customer, and let's try to actually call this new path. So I can do something like, maybe I will copy this, and I can ask /discounts and then / here is my resource ID. So this is the newly created discounts ID, and let's just put it here and let's make a get request. I'll close this one. Get. All right, so here is our get. There is a query. The query has the proper ID, which is bound through this path. And now I can click F5. Here is our discount. The discount, of course, exists. Now we're getting our customer. And finally, we are turning our new, a little bit bigger DTO. And this is how you can deal with your queries. So just to keep in mind, here are the handlers. So just like we did for our events and then for our comments, we also have the handlers for our queries. So query is a type, like the query there was a common event and there was a handler for this. There is also a query type, which is a class, and there's also a handler for the query. And again, instead of using the domain repositories like iDiscount or iCustomer repository, we tend to use the plain raw connection to the database, because sometimes our read models may require a lot more data, or may require us to call some specific view if we are using SQL database or whatever it is.
Just one thing that has just popped in my mind, my mind for when you mentioned this Mongo repository or SQL. I think that on one hand, using the domain repository seems fine when it comes to changing your data source. I mean, in this case, of course, maybe not the domain repository itself, but maybe you would need some additional layer over the in this case
like a wrapper, because like a wrapper. That's correct.
Yeah, because in this case, if you will decide to change the MongoDB to exchanges for the other data source, you will need quite a lot of changes. So maybe some additional, to avoid this abstraction leaking to the
that's
to the query handler,
yeah.
you'll need some additional layer between.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so you could have here an interface, maybe something like data service, data fetcher, whatever.
Data source,
yeah,
whatever.
data source, whatever it is, which would ask you to provide. I don't know. It could be a link expression, or it could be your own, DSL, like your own language for getting queries that will be internally translated into the query, whatever it is. So we would have this abstraction layer, as you said, which is
and inside just use decomposition to actually fetch the data sources from plenty different data stores. So one, it might be for some in-memory store. And this will also work well for the testing, so you can actually mock your data store or data resource in the unit tests to provide some, in-memory implementation, while in the production you will use CosmoDB or whatever you want.
Yeah.
And one more thing that actually popped in, can you go to controller? I mean the internal controller.
The discounts.
Yeah, the discounts. Yeah. So in this case, as I see for now, we will always return the OK, so 200. And what if we will not find any data?
Yeah, that's correct. I totally forgot about it. So let's actually change it a little bit. So I will stop it, and I can do the following. So here I can say my discount equals this. So if discount is null, I will return the not found, which is 404, and if it's here, I will just return my discount. Yeah, you're correct. I totally forgot about this, and it's a good point. So when there is no data, you don't really want to return like OK. You want to return 404, and that's it.
Yeah.
And of course, you can put it into some helper method and create a base controller, as we did in our API or other services that will, so you don't have to repeat yourself many times. Okay.
Yeah, but for the simplicity's sake, this is fine. But you should also remember about this, that we have plenty different HTTP status codes, and this is very informative, especially for the developers. It's nothing worse than you see the 500 and it's no details, or as I saw, you're returning the 200 and the stack trace inside the response.
Oh yeah. And 200 with errors collection or other weird things. So
that's
quite common. Okay, so it's working now. Now maybe let's do this one last thing, and let's show how we can actually grab this data with our API gateway, right? So instead of calling our services directly, which usually are internal and we don't want to expose them to the end user, we want to have our API gateway that will maybe authenticate at first and then authorize and then ask the internal service to get the data, whatever security we have here or whatever data aggregation we need to do. So this is also one of the responsibilities of the API gateway. Okay, so let's jump now into our gateway. All right.
Yep.
So what do we need to do? Since we are implementing our gateway on our own, by simply adding the code to our controllers, what I can do here is that, well, unfortunately, I have to repeat myself at least, I think, twice. Or I think I have to repeat myself twice for our queries. So for our discounts controller, we want to have the same queries, right? So maybe let's just do copy and paste, and then we will do some refactoring.
Yep.
Okay. So the first thing you may notice is what we can return here. So I can either say that I will return just a plain object, and this is fine. I will just get the data and return it as this. But if I want to do some manipulation, I could define here a discount DTO and do the same model, or maybe do a different model. And within my gateway, I would also have to ask maybe another service and do some data aggregation here. So it's always the matter of choice.
It's not the one-to-one mapping.
Yeah.
In this case.
So maybe let's do it. Maybe let's make it simple for now. Let's just say that our API will return the same object. So we will not be, adding these classes here once again, because it's going the same. So we'll just say it's an object.
Yeah, but it's all, of course, for most of the cases you will actually would like, especially for the Swagger or something. Want to have this kind of information. But for now, it's okay.
Yeah. So for the Swagger, you could have your types defined here as well, or you could have your Swagger. You could point it into your internal services and just build your documentation based on your internal services and expose it as one big documentation. So there are different techniques. So let's just say that we will turn an object here. We can actually do it like this. It doesn't really have to be IRMable, because it will be IRMable under the hood anyways. And another object for our get discount. And again, so here we'll say, as you can see, for example, in different controllers, that we are not passing this get discount query. So I can just say that there is my GUID ID, and it will be passed somewhere to some service that will ask my discount service to get the data. So here is my GUID ID. But for my find discounts, I will actually want to have a query simply because I can have multiple parameters there. I don't want to specify these parameters, one by one. So let's create a new class. I can name it the same. Yeah.
We have just one. Maybe you want to?
What do you mean?
In this case, we just have one.
What do you mean by one?
We have just one parameter inside the query.
You mean like this?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we can do it. Okay, we can also do it like this. Makes sense. But I think we've got this issue here because we have the same methods with the same parameters. So it started to scream. But I can name it to maybe like get details. Okay, yeah, so let's make it like this.
And I think that for the query, you will actually need to from query attribute. If you fetch this from query, I'm not sure. For path, it will work, but from the
no, you don't have to do it because it will be just treated as your query string after the question mark.
I don't know.
So you don't have to do this from query. From query is if you want to bind to the class, to this object. Okay, so what we can do now, how we can call our service. And of course, I could do something like HTTP client, and I could inject my iHTTP client factory, create a new HTTP client instance, and then, just do HTTP client get async. But we don't want to do it. So we want to use the RestEase, the library called RestEase. And
and the reason for that is just because, with the HTTP client now, it got even more awesome with as you mentioned, the HTTP client factory and so forth. But the rest is just very simple.
Yeah, it's
you actually create the interface, which is provides you using this interface. The rest will create a strongly typed HTTP client for you. So as you see in this case, this is the example of the customer service. And can you extract the using just to show that we actually use the RestEase?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So as you see at the very last, we have this library. So you can get it from the Nugget, and you can also visit this on the GitHub. So basically, what you need to do is to create an interface, and then create the signatures of your methods. So in this case, let's start with the first one. So we'll just create get async. So this is some endpoint, and we expect that this endpoint will return me the customer object. And we specify that we'll provide the ID in the path. And in this case, the RestEase requires this as you see, the path attribute or the query attribute. This is required by the RestEase itself. And we have this get attribute.
Yeah, it's internal attribute. I don't say that it's the attribute of this library.
Yeah. And as you see, we have this get attribute that actually specifies the endpoint without the host part, of course. So in this case, this is the customer/ID. So this looks pretty much very similar to the ASP.NET Core, action structure. Having this interface, you simply can use the static factory for creating the client for you. So if you, we can go to see this.
Yeah, there's a little bit of magic, and we'll talk about this in the next episode because we are also integrating it with some external tools. But by default, what it does, if you take a look at this configure default client, it just creates this HTTP client, registers the scheme, host port, and that's it.
Yeah.
So this is the whole magic.
So in the interface, you only provide the endpoint and the host part. So whether this is HTTP or HTTPS, and the port and the host part is delivered from the. You can actually either hard code this or get this from some settings. In this case, we'll use just app settings JSON for keeping the host part of the particular services. So if you see this, so we have this RestEase section defined in our app settings, and as Piotr said, we'll just skip the load balancer because this is we'll cover this in a next episode. And then we have this array of the services structured. So as you see, we have for each microservice we have one object. So basically what we have here is the name, which in this case is actually the name of the container from the Docker network, because we're using the Docker Compose. But if we'll run this without the Docker, you'll actually need to change the name to localhost, I believe. Right?
No.
Sorry.
Host.
Okay.
This is the name that you use for this retrieving.
Okay. Sorry. No, this
is the host. Only the host.
So this is just. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So you have just name and So the host is in this case is the local host, but of course this will not work within the Docker itself. So for this case, it works. And the scheme, so you define whether you use the HTTP or HTTPS and the port itself. So we actually need to add our discount here.
So let's just copy and paste again. And this is very simple. The name will be discount service, and keep in mind that you can name it whatever you want. It can be discounts, discount, XYZ, whatever. And discount service, localhost, HTTP as a scheme, and 5010 as a port. Okay?
Yeah.
So this is the configuration part for RestEase, and within our startup, we want to say we want to register the new service. So I will say that here we'll have the new interface called iDiscounts service, and the service name is discount service. So this extension method, when you provide here this service name, it will look for the service name within this RestEase section in the app settings and grab this configuration data and create your client for the RestEase. So that's the whole magic behind this extension method, which we've shown you a few minutes before.
So we need to create the interface.
Yeah, that's correct. So once again, iDiscount service has a new interface, and pretty much the same thing that we have here. So maybe let me just paste it below.
Yeah, and one more thing, just to let you know, there is also, as you see, there is this allow any status code attribute, and the reason for this is because the RestEase by default throws an exception if it gets non-successful status code. So in case it would get from 404, so not found from our discount service, the RestEase itself would actually throw some exception, and we want to, for us, we know that the 404 is fine. This is the fine status code that we would actually want to return to the user to inform him that your data was not found. So we need to, you can either put this on the specific method on the whole client, I believe. So we could actually remove this, allow any status codes from the each method. We could actually put it on the very top. Yeah, and for now we need to add these methods that we actually created. So let's start with this find discounts, or maybe
let's start with the details.
Okay, so we have this discount. Okay, so get async and the find async.
Yeah, and the find async. So as you can see here, for example, for customer service, we created the browse customers class, which is the same as our browse customers query that lives in our customer service, which of course doesn't have to be, but it's the same. And by using this query attribute, which is similar as from query for the ASP.NET Core, the RestEase is able to bind this data and just forward it, and it can be done using this serialization method. So if you send to your API some long query string with either 1 or 10 parameters, and you want to have the same query string sent to your service, you can use this query, create a class, and just make it this query serialized, and it will just redirect the whole query string to the service. So let's do another one, and again we'll also return an object here, and let's call it find async, and here we'll just provide our customer ID.
And we also need to change the...
Yeah, but it's not really going to be the part of our path. It should be like this, right? Without this path. And, is it going to work without the path, or do I need to put this?
Yes. If you will not provide the if you're doing the get and you're not providing any additional attribute, the parameter itself will be automatically attached as a query parameter. So in this case, this will do the discounts and then the question mark, customer ID equals your parameter.
So what happens now is when I will ask my discount service to get the data, it will at first register this discount service. The HTTP client will be set to the localhost 5010, and then when I call, for example, this method, it will call localhost HTTP localhost 5010 /discount/ID and pass this ID here. And this will get our data from.
So that's why you're not seeing the host part in the interface.
Yeah.
We simply extract this from the app settings.
Yeah. So let's see here. Okay, it's registered properly. So let's finish our controller and discount controller, and I can inject here the discount service like this. And what I can do here, so if I want to, let me start with our list. So I can say something like, again, discounts equals await, and then discount service get async, and we'll pass here the financing, the customer ID, and we could probably do it like this, and it will return either an empty array or a collection with our discounts for the particular customer by finding the discounts for this customer ID, and another one for getting the details. So the same story goes here, but one thing, if you take a look at this base controller, you can see that here we have this method called single or result. So basically what it does, it checks whether the data is not null. If it's null, it will just return not found. So we don't have to do this return not found here. We can just say something like await single, and here I will say that the it's gonna be like this. Single await my discount service get async by ID. And I think I need to put here the OK. And if it doesn't work, I know why it's not going to work. Sorry. Okay, it does work. Should work at least. Because here is the action result of type T and there is the iAction result interface. So it should be probably something like action result of T. But yeah. I think it's
because
worked.
you wrapped for now you wrapped the OK in the OK as
yeah, but if it was like this, let's see. Yeah, I'll have to change my the remaining controllers.
Oh yeah, okay. Because this changed in the.
But let's see if it's going to work with this weird.
It's the 5th episode, so I'm hoping that you finally fail with these demos because you're on fire. for 5 episodes.
Let's get it back to action results. So, okay, let's see. If it doesn't work, well,
I've never seen the OK wrapped into the OK, and I'm hoping that the universe will not imply.
Yeah.
We'll see.
All right, let's start the API and the dot and the discount service. Only these two services. No identity service because here is our allow anonymous attribute, so we don't have to pass here the JSON Web Token. Okay, so let's come on. Oh, I think I have it up and running on my.
Yes.
Oh, but yeah, this is not like a code failure.
Okay, that's not counted.
All right, so here's my API, and my discount service should start. And at first, let's see if I can actually call my API. All right, so let's see if the previous requests still work. So here is my first request, and there is my second request. So these requests work through our discount service. So let's try to do the same, but by using our API URL instead. API URL. And also here.
So the only change is the host part of
this. So right now we'll be asking for data through our gateway. All right, so the first one, invalid URI.
What?
Did I?
You have too many curly brackets.
Oh yeah, at the beginning. 3 or 2. All right, so one more time. Send a request. Let's see if it's gonna work. Whoa, it worked. So as you can see right now, we are calling our API, and through the RestEase, it's calling our service internally and just returns the data. And let's see if the second one also works. Whoa, it's also working, right? But this is what happened. So it's our OK wrapped into OK. So this is this weird thing. All right, so let's do a quick fix here, and let's just make this method below. And I will just call it maybe a result of T and the action result of T like this. And let's restart it. It should work just fine right now. But later on we'll probably fix our just rename this single to this result and we'll fix our controllers. So let's just ensure that it actually works. So here is my result. Okay, and let me just restart the API. But yeah, as you can see, everything works, and that's one of the simplest way, besides using plain HTTP client, to establish internal communication between your services. But as you might already as you might imagine, or as you might already ask yourself, now we have this hard-coded configuration. And what if we were to use some dynamic IP addresses, or what if there would be multiple instances of your services? And what if you want to do some load balancing here? So it will probably need to be handled some other way. So let's see.
Yeah, this is the simplest way of dealing with this type of communication. But
Works.
in the next episode, you will.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah, it works. It works.
Yeah.
It just worked. So.
We'll go to the another level.
Yeah.
So
This is the basics of dealing with queries, returning your read models, the idea behind the DTOs in general, and the way of communicating through from your gateway with your internal service and returning data to your end user. And like we said,
and you can continue.
yeah, like we said, if you would like to do some data manipulation here, maybe we wouldn't return the object from our maybe iDiscount service like we do from our iCustomer service. We could have this strongly typed class here, and then internally we could maybe change some fields or ask another services for another data, and then do some bigger objects and so on. It really depends what you need to do.
Yeah. The reason we use the object was that we've been recording for over an hour and 15 minutes. So
Oh yeah,
we need to.
yeah, I was aware of that, but I think it's really good that we talk about this part, because now you'll have a few days to actually think about all these issues, and yeah, we'll give you the answers, right?
Yeah. So as a summary, I'll just say that if you, for some reason, you cannot wait for the next episode, there was a discussion about configuring the other ways of synchronous communication using the console as a service discovery and the Fabio as a load balancer. So you can either go to the Gitter and scroll up for this conversation.
There's actually over 20 people now, and there's been some really cool conversations. So feel free to join.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great questions and us trying to answer this as fast as possible.
Also on forums.
And I think that one folk actually pastes this my answer. Yeah, so this is the configure a console Fabio in DShop, and this is this topic.
Yeah.
So if you want to play with the console Fabio before we actually record the next episode, you can actually follow this instruction. It should work for you. So yeah, we encourage you to join our forum and the Gitter, and if you have any kind of the issues or just questions regarding this stuff we're recording, just join us, and we will we'll do our best to give you fast and precise answer.
Yeah. So I think we need to finish now, because we almost have like length of 2 average episodes. So let's be done with this. So see you in the next episode, right?
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.